Okay.
Okay, we're live. No one is here.
We're 1 minute shy. Oh, there we are. It's 11 now.
Okay. Oh, 7 people are here.
Yeah, I saw that. So how does...
We'll just wait until a few more people come in, I guess.
You see.
So will you tell us when to mute our mics? Or does that automatically happen? It doesn't.
No, you would have to.
I think maybe when I start my introduction,
Yeah.
everyone just mutes themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess we could say welcome. There are some people popping in. So we're just going to wait a few more minutes because I've just kind of gone live now to see a few more people come, and then we'll kick off.
Yeah. Do we leave it till 5 past?
I don't know. I think we could probably start. There's a good number of people here, so we can kind of go ahead and start.
Okay, welcome everyone to this, our first webinar event for the Creative Europe desk in Ireland. It's a showcasing event, and please bear with us. As I said, it's our first webinar event, but thanks a million for coming along. Myself and Katie Lowry run the Creative Europe Culture Desk in Dublin, and along with Leona Cully, who works across the media and culture desk. She's the digital media manager. We'll be hosting the event today. Leona is going to be the moderator, and she will take your questions. If you could use the chat function for your questions, we'll introduce at the end of the presentations about the Irish projects. We will have a bit of time for questions then. As I said, today is about a showcasing event. We're looking back over 2 successful Irish projects from the cooperation projects from the last Creative Europe programme. We'll hear about them. They were at the heart of the cooperation projects as Irish partners. So we'll hear from curator Chris Clarke from the Glucksman, who will talk about Vibe Voyage Inside a Blind Experience. And we'll also hear from Maoliosa Boyle, the director of Rua Red, and Joyce Dunne, development manager of Rua Red, and they'll talk a little bit about UCED project. So we look forward to inviting them to join us in a couple of moments. So I will just go on to the topics.
We can all turn our cameras off now. Sorry, Aoife.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So just to look a little bit at the topics we'll be covering today, we'll talk about what Creative Europe funding is for, and again, what the Creative Europe desk, Culture Desk does in Ireland. We'll look back at Ireland's participation in Creative Europe and learning, as we said, from Irish projects. Then we'll take some questions about their specific experiences, and then we will look at funding opportunities. Katie, we're looking at current funding opportunities and upcoming ones towards 2021. She will also be looking at tips for building an application and the next steps for starting to thinking about proposals and relationships within Europe. At the very end, then we'll go back to having some questions. So just to look at Creative Europe and the desks in Ireland, we have 3 offices. There are 2 media desks, one in Dublin and one in Galway, and they work with the media sub-programme. And then we have the Culture Office that I said myself and Katie run, and that is based in the Arts Council, and we work with the Culture sub-programme. We'll talk a little bit about what the specific strands of that programme is. So the Culture Office, we are the main point of information, advice, and we give assistance to all Irish applicants. So all queries come through our office, and we promote the programme locally, regionally, and at a national level. And that is normally through our programme of yearly events. Obviously, things have changed a little bit in the last while with the new situation we find ourselves in. So today is the first of many webinar events that we'll have throughout the rest of the year. They'll be looking at showcasing and also different policy initiatives, and then looking at building applications and workshops again towards the end of the year. So we collaborate with our key sectoral stakeholders and agencies that goes across the board, from the Arts Council to the Department to Culture Ireland, to other organisations such as Largus, through the Erasmus Plus programme and Europe for Systems. But we also work always with different resource organisations across the specific art forms and across the country, and we keep them informed and trying to get the details of the programme out so that all the stakeholders and all the sectors are informed about the programme. We also collaborate then with our Creative Europe desks, our colleagues in the network in Europe. That would be through study visits and from us inviting different desks to Dublin, and we talk through how we approach the programme here, how the arts and culture sector is run here, and the various different agencies, and vice versa. We will go to other desks in Europe and learn about how they approach the programme themselves, and then different kind of organisations will get to know who's who basically, and who's part of the programme, which helps us then again in partner searches. We will have the information about different organisations working in the different sectors. So we also develop a cross-sectoral partnership and events with the media desk here and the media programme, so they'll be running throughout the year. So just to look at why European Union fund culture in the first place. So they really recognise the intrinsic value of arts and culture in the European Union. And that's not just on the economies of different countries, but also on the civic society and the positive effect that the arts and culture sector have on society. And these have been committed to this importance to culture and art in different treaties, for instance, the Lisbon Treaty. And then more recently, there are links to broader EU policy. The Europe 2020 strategy in 2010 was post the financial crisis and really looked at harnessing the arts and culture sector to build up those communities and those countries and in economies and all of that. And the Agenda for Culture, which was adopted in May in 2018, also built on that and those harnessing of the cultural sector, of cultural diversity, and trying to build a social cohesion and well-being in the countries through mobility for artists, protection of heritage. And obviously that boosts jobs and growth and in the cultural and creative sectors, and also strengthens relations in the European Union to strengthen peace and prosperity. So they are obviously quite political as well as social aims of the European Union. So looking at Ireland's participation in Creative Europe has been pretty building itself over the last few years. 66 Irish organisations have been involved in Creative Europe funded projects, and a total project grants over the whole programme is for over 42 million euro. the direct grant aids there going to Ireland is over 4.7 million euro, which is a substantial amount of funding to organisations in Ireland. The success rate has continuously done well at 36.6%, and that is overall the overall success rate is at 23%. Irish organisations have really worked on networking and working with other organisations in 34 countries out of a possible 41, which is pretty amazing. So it is that kind of transnational network building that continues to be helping organisations in Ireland. Irish projects have seen through the literary translation funding 338,000 euro being injected into projects in Ireland, and through the support for platforms there's been 320,000 euro funding going to partners based in Ireland in the platforms. So over the last programme, 1.46 billion euro was put into funding in the programme, and that is split up with media sub-programme at 56% of the funding and cultural sub-programme at 36%. So we still have a major amount of funding through the culture programme coming to us. We're really happy to announce this week brand new results from the Cooperation Projects Call, which was just at the end of 2019. And we have 7 successful partners. 2 of those are project leads, and they started with Carlow County Council with Craft Hub. The project lead again with Cork Printmakers from Within the Margins, Ormston House, Artist Run Network Europe, New Eye Digital Content, Retold Stories, Sustaining Cultural Memories in Open Air Museums, and DCU Library G-Book 2 for the European teen readers and creators in gender positive narratives. Glucksman Gallery, who we'll hear from in a little while, but they are successful with blind engagement in accessible museum projects, and Irish Aerial Creation Centre, Island Connect. So they're a great series of results, but they're also showing a great breadth of regional organisations there and across the art forms. So that's really good to see for the programme. So what is Creative Europe hoping to achieve as a programme? As I said, the funding for arts culture is a tool for the European Union to achieve its social and political aims. And they would need to see a demonstration of a big impact at EU level by significantly addressing the programme priorities. And then a healthy Creative Europe programme also has great European added value for the Union. So Creative Europe itself has its own overall objectives for the programme, and they are to support the capacity of European cultural and creative sectors to operate transnationally, to promote the transnational circulation of cultural and creative works, to reach new audience in Europe and beyond, to strengthen the financial capacity of the cultural and creative sectors, and in particular small and medium-sized enterprises and organisations, and to support transnational policy cooperation in order to foster policy development, innovation, audience, and new business models. And obviously all of those areas, all of those objectives really do speak to Irish organisations at the moment. I mean, obviously they did before, but just going forward, that it is really important to have those funding opportunities for sustaining our organisations, our cultural organisations. And Creative Europe itself has its own priorities, and these have run throughout the programme, and they will run again in the next call for the new Creative Europe programme in 2021, possibly with some new additional priorities, but these will be the mainstay. So the transnational mobility, its support for cross-border international touring events and exhibitions and residencies, so both artists and organisations would be supported there. Audience development is to look at the development of long-term audiences within Europe, but also to focus on audience experience and development within Ireland, within the local capacity. Capacity building looks at helping the sector to adapt to digital shifts, to new business models or revenue management, and towards education and training, helping the cultural workers and artists to internationalize their career and foster international networks. Creative Europe, these priorities are, again, intercultural dialogue, which is looking at respecting the cultures of others, the language of others, and obviously it's important when we see social integration of refugees and migrants as a continuing factor in Europe. And the EYCH, so European Year for Cultural Heritage, was in 2018. And this priority is a legacy of that, where there was a focus, or there is a continuing focus of awareness on common history and values for heritage and history, just reinforcing a sense of belonging in a European shared space. So the culture sub-program is what we work with in the Culture Office, and these are there are four main strands from this program. And they're the European Cooperation Projects, which is support for transnational cultural projects that work across Europe with varying amounts of partners. This is then support for European networks, and that's for networks that prioritize activities in professional development, in networking, in peer learning and exchanges. Then there's support for European platforms, and that is the support for platforms which prioritize the showcasing of emerging talent and stimulate European-wide programming for these emerging talented artists. And then the literary translation is support for quality literature works to be translated into different languages and to open up different markets and audiences for those pieces of work. So as I said earlier, we wanted to look back at two projects within the cooperation projects from the last program, and at the heart of these innovative projects were two organizations, Irish organizations. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Chris Clarke, the senior curator from Glucksman, and he will talk a little bit about Vibe and the project Voyage Inside a Blind Experience. So I'd like to introduce Chris.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks very much, Aoife.
No
thanks everyone there at Creative Europe. It's been a kind of wonderful support. And yeah, a real pleasure to announce that our work with Creative Europe is going forward as well as a recipient of 2020 grants. And so what I'm going to talk about today is a project that actually, I guess, now in retrospect, we can think of as the beginnings of that of this kind of ongoing initiative, and particularly an exhibition here called Joseph and Annie Albers' Voyage Inside a Blind Experience from 2018. So just to give you a little bit of overall context of how this came together, this is a bit of the blurb here, and I usually hate reading out these things during presentations when you can see it as well, but maybe just to give a little bit of an overview, we're looking at the idea of, is it possible to experience abstract artworks without using your eyes? How can a visual art exhibition be experienced by people who are partially sighted or blind? And so Voyage Inside a Blind Experience, or VIBE as it was shortened to, considers these questions by presenting key works from the artists alongside tactile models, braille texts, and playful art encounters led by touch. And I'm going to talk about a few of these instances and how they were realized within the exhibition, but also within our wider education program. Works on display included, of course, Annie Albers' hugely influential textile works, as well as Joseph's renowned homage to the square paintings, as well as things like his record cover designs, which are probably a little bit less well known, but were a way to kind of maybe amplify some of the ideas of the multi-sensory by having a room where you could not only see or touch these album covers, but you could actually experience the jazz music that was playing on the actual vinyl records. And a big part of the exhibition was it included a dark room where our visitors were invited to explore objects by touch. I'll show you an image of that in a minute. as well as a number of tactile things that reflect particularly Joseph's teaching at Yale, and also, I guess, some of the things he would have picked up when he was at the Bauhaus, and this idea of how you can use the kind of tactile feeling as a way of kind of learning about materiality, about composition, about form. And so this, I think, particularly with the Creative Europe desk in Ireland, where we felt that their input would come in was we wanted to really expand and extend our kind of education and outreach programs. So we always do things with schools and kind of communities and kind of summer art courses and these things. But there was an opportunity here to kind of reach a new audience and maybe implement some good practices that we could use going forward. And so we ended up partnering with, of course, being a university gallery, with UCC Disability Support Services, but also with Arts and Disability Ireland, with Child Vision, with Fighting Blindness, and with Irish Guide Dogs for the Blind. So we had a number of partners there who we could work with, but also learn some things through in terms of developing some of the tools and some of the practices, I think, that that we want to make kind of a regular standard part of our exhibition experience. And so in terms of thinking about the partnerships here as well, I should say that we weren't the lead partner on this. That was actually L'Ente Servizi Culturali, who are based in Milan, who approached us through, I think, a common partner in the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, who the Glucksman have worked with in the past on a couple of occasions. And also with and my Italian is not going to be very good here, but I guess I could say the Institute for the Blind in Milan, and did a bit of a research trip there where they kind of talked a bit about some of the tools that they use, but some of the kind of ideas that we should keep in mind as we approach an exhibition like this, and how we could use that to train some of our staff and some of our facilitators on how to kind of round out and further develop their own teaching skills. And of course, this exhibition also was part of a touring project as well. So at first it was at the Santa Maria della Scala in Siena, and then after us, it moved to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb. So those were our European partners on the project. So I mentioned earlier about the Vibe Darkroom. So this was a space that we constructed, which was completely pitch black as you came into Gallery 1, and had a bit of a handrail as well that would lead you through the space as well. And you'd stop at different stations there, and you'd feel certain kind of materials that Joseph primarily would have used in his teaching practices. And so we wanted to do something, I think, that, I mean, in a way, this was also borrowed from a much larger space that they developed in the Institute for the Blind in Milan, which was almost like a 45-minute to 1 hour long tour where you're led through different spaces to kind of heighten your kind of sensory encounter with the exhibition. But we wanted to use this in a way not just to create an exhibition that can be experienced by the visually impaired, but also hopefully have our sighted audiences gain a little bit of a further understanding into what it's like to experience visual art when your visuality is actually quite impaired. And so this was a way of hopefully kind of bridging those two things. And so these are some of the other tactile elements and materials that Joseph would use when he was teaching at Yale. And you can't really see it very well in the background there, but a number of drawing exercises by some of those students there. And these are really quite simple, paper folding techniques, but they could be kind of picked up and played around with and actually even straightened out and refolded. And it was a colleague from the Albers Foundation, Fritz Horstmann, who you'll see later in the presentation, who actually makes these things and kind of actually employs a lot of these things in his own practice as an artist, but also as an educator. And this was also kind of an interesting way, I think, of getting some of the ideas of Joseph's homage to the Square series out. Of course, Joseph was particularly interested in color theory and the idea of how different shifts and tones of color can really kind of amplify effects and kind of create this kind of different visual kind of element, I suppose. But how do you get that across when you're dealing with people who might not be able to kind of see colors, who might have serious impairments to that? And so this is something that was devised and I'm going to actually jump ahead a little bit here and just show you the homage to the squares. So here you can see a run of them as well, using these kind of shifts in tone through the nested squares to really kind of show how those colors react and respond to each other. And so what we did with the water table was we had 3 pools of water of different temperatures. So one that's quite hot, one that's room temperature, one that's quite cold. And the idea is you would put your hands in the 2 ones on the outside, let them adjust to that. And then when you move both of those hands into that middle pool, you can feel the different relations, that your hands will have a different kind of tactile sensation to them because they become used to these different temperatures. And so that felt like a good analogy to some of the ways that Joseph had used color in his work. And just to jump back to this one as well, you can see that next to the paintings, there are these almost like little relief sculptures that are laid flat that show the layering techniques, the different ways that the squares are nested as well. And we had these interspersed throughout the exhibition as a way of letting people to kind of feel the actual compositions of the paintings. And in 2 instances, the Albers Foundation very generously lent us actual works by Albers that people could actually touch and feel, which as a curator is always a little bit nervy to see people touching artworks, but certainly it gave you a different experience of those works to actually feel the kind of paint on the canvas. And so here's an example as well of what I was talking about. You can see that print work here, but actually you can also see the little relief tactile piece next to it as well. And the intricacy, I think, of the printmaking as well is something that we wanted to really kind of portray or kind of to get across to our audiences. I had mentioned that Joseph had designed a number of these album covers in the 1960s as well for, I guess, kind of like smooth jazz kind of music. And so we had a small space there as well where you could go in and the room was playing the actual albums from, or the music from these albums, as well as a number of the albums themselves framed on the walls, and similarly a number of these tactile elements as well to give you a visual sensation of what it is you're looking at and maybe what you're hearing as well. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about these is that the compositions and the designs really attempt to kind of capture this kind of quite jazzy, syncopated music as well, and through using these kind of minimal forms. So you're kind of getting it kind of visually, aurally, and also tactily, I think, here in a space like this. That combination of kind of senses was quite important, I think, to Joseph and to Annie's work. I'll get on to Annie in a minute here as well. So a number of prints by Annie Albers. So we had a few of her textile works, of course, which she's obviously renowned for, but a number of prints as well that I guess you could see them as very much kind of demonstrating or employing some of these techniques of kind of weaving and lace work that she had been exploring throughout her career. And so obviously you can see that in the kind of visual elements, but how do you also kind of communicate not just that sense of the kind of the interlacing of kind of textiles, but also that particular feel of the textiles as well. And so we see another couple of tactile elements that have been introduced into the exhibition where you can kind of almost unravel and kind of feel the kind of looseness or the tautness of the textile pieces and of the images that you see represented in the background there. And so this was something that I think, throughout the exhibition, hopefully kind of amplified and gave a better sense of some of the processes of making, as well as offering a different in route into how we can appreciate art. Here we see one of Joseph's his Tu Monte Alban print in the background, a number of tactile displays, and it's slightly obscured, I think, by the audience visitors here, by the man and his child. But we have got a series of 4 different relief representations of that image in the background. So one of which very much kind of extends out towards you, one of which also recesses back into the panel, other ones with different variations. And it shows the kind of the optical effects of the image itself, where depending on your perspective and the way you look at it, it kind of shifts, so certain things become kind of foregrounded and certain things slip away. And so this gave a real sense, I think, of how a composition like that can actually have a certain amount of kind of movement, a certain amount of kind of visual flexibility, I think, even when you're just using, appreciating it visually. And so I had mentioned before, certainly with the Creative Europe Ireland desk, we thought we could really kind of stretch out and do some interesting things with education, and hopefully build a little bit of a legacy as well that we're now implementing kind of throughout like a lot of our programs, and building on those partnerships. So Fritz Horstman from the Albers Foundation brought a number of artists and teachers from around Cork City and County to give a workshop in color theory, and employed some very kind of simple techniques just to show how color relationships can work, and the way you can kind of use them in your practice or in your teaching. And we had a long-going relationship here with UCC Disability Support Services as well. And so we felt it was important that they really got a sense that this exhibition was something for them, and also I think not just this exhibition, that we're a space for everybody. We also, and I didn't mention this, we had for the first time we've used audio guides within the exhibition space. So different voices and different kind of stories or anecdotes or descriptions of the work that you're experiencing, and that's something that we've kind of continued to implement in our kind of projects here. This the audio thing, of whether we're looking at outreach projects, or we're looking at offsite projects, or we're looking at even the UCC art collection, as a way of giving people a chance to kind of not just look at a text or read something before before going to experience it, but maybe having a different kind of encounter with the work. And so we did quite a range of workshops with community groups, as well as schools, and with some of the societies and clubs that we have within UCC as well. Atlante, who were the lead partners on this, I think they actually made 2 documentaries, 2 films based on the exhibition. So here we can see a visitor touching one of the actual Albers works that you were allowed to touch, which it still seems so strange to me. But so here we have one of our visitors here getting a real hands-on experience of one of Albers's homage to the squares. And of course, I mean, we always work extensively with schools in the region, within the city and the county, and within Munster. But certainly, it felt like with this show that we were able to kind of maybe even extend that a little bit further. I think we had something about 16 school workshops and 15 community workshops. So several hundred students coming in over the course of the exhibition run, and I think it was almost 2,800 visitors who were here particularly for education experiences, not just to look at the work, but to partake of a lunchtime talk or a workshop, or things we did like touch tours, where we had people led throughout the campus to actually touch works from the UC Art Collection, or things like a torch tour, where we had people led through the Vibe exhibition just by a single torch. So you get this kind of very focused, singular view of artworks as you're kind of brought through the exhibition space. And we also then tried to implement some of these things in our kind of forward-moving relationship with kind of teachers and artists. So Claire McLaughlin is an artist who's done a number of workshops in her practice, and this is largely what our practice is concerned about, working with the visually impaired, and also showing others how to work with visually impaired students or participants. And so we brought her in to do a workshop with art teachers, a masterclass, where they could not just bring these approaches to their own teaching, but also have maybe a greater sensitivity to some of the issues that people are dealing with when they're appreciating works of visual art. And so the very last thing I wanted to show you, and I don't know if I've raced through this too much here, is just kind of a neat thing that we wouldn't normally get a chance to do, but this is in addition to a regular catalog, we produced a Braille catalog as well. And this is really something that was led by the guys in Milan and by Atlante, but felt like a real rare kind of pleasure to see works by Joseph and Annie kind of turned into Braille form, and particularly to have these kind of these relief images on the paper itself, where you could not just kind of go to the exhibition and feel the tactile things, but you could bring something home like this as well, and get a real different kind of sensory experience of these kind of wonderful works. So that's it, and I look forward to hearing any questions you might have of my presentation.
Great, thanks a million, Chris. Thanks for that. That was really interesting. And would love one of those Braille books myself for to have an idea of it. So Leona is going to introduce the questions that have come in from the attendees. So she will field them to you, Chris.
Sure.
Hi, Chris. That was a lovely presentation.
Thank
you. So I think we have a question, and this is usually what people are mostly interested in, is about funding models.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd like to know, in terms of funding, how partners decided who funded which action, and did you get any other co-funding?
So we did have bits of little pockets of co-funding that would come in through things like the Ireland funds and kind of more local philanthropy, and through UCC, of course. I mean, UCC are kind of always a huge supporter of what we do in terms of kind of, you know, overheads and these things as well. So, and I know that's not true of most institutions. In terms of our funding, I guess we were approached with this project. We had done exhibitions working with the Albers Foundation in the past. We have a very, very good relationship with them. And they had maybe kind of steered Atlante a little bit in our direction when they were looking to put together their original application. And so really what we could provide there was, I guess, you know, we could provide obviously like a gallery institution, a space, and we could provide, you know, some expertise and relationships with kind of partners with different community groups and partners. But in terms of funding and stuff, that's one of those things that you like to get those emails when somebody's saying we're putting an application for this, and we will basically be applying for all of the heavy lifting core funding stuff. So that's all your transport, all your insurance, all your, not all, but most of our kind of technical installation stuff. Then I think it was through talking to Katie that we were encouraged to apply for, obviously, the co-funding. Because
this is the Arts Council co-funding scheme.
Yeah. So because, you know, we can sustain and we can manage a very strong education program, and we built that into our kind of core Arts Council funding that we get. But it just felt like such an opportunity, I think, there to kind of to really extend that and kind of think, well, who is it we're missing here, and what can we do? And even when you think about working with kind of school groups and stuff, I mean, if you want to expand outside of like schools in your vicinity, I mean, you have to think about busing, you have to think about lunches. And so we were able to kind of use some of this kind of this co-funding then to actually, you know, bring in people who would very rarely get the chance to kind of come in and spend a day in the gallery or to work on a kind of a longer term project. So I would say that in terms of funding, obviously that was completely essential to what we were doing, and not just in realizing exhibition and getting it out, but for other funders, yeah, little pockets here and there, I suppose, and a lot of times it's kind of institutional partnerships as well. So with the university and with some of the philanthropy which comes through the Cork University Fund as well.
Okay, and does each partner spend their budget within their own country? Yeah, pretty much. I think there were a few things that went across the board in terms of, you know, having somebody who is doing like website design. So there were those things that would have covered all three venues as well. And for us, we were kind of, you know, kind of given our pocket to manage our insurance and manage our kind of transport, because again, you're talking about works that are quite substantial, quite kind of well packed and heavy graded kind of stuff. Although actually, again, now that I think about it, I'd have to go back and look at the budget on this, like the way it divvies up, of course, because, you know, the main part of it is getting it all from, you know, Connecticut or from New York over to Europe. Once it's in Europe, of course, it makes it a little bit easier to manage. But by and large, we were given a chunk of money that we could use for our own kind of our own install, our own kind of mediation, things that kind of made it very much kind of, you know, a Glucksman exhibition. And then when, you know, when I saw it over in Zagreb, you know, they'd installed in a very different way, a beautiful way as well, but, you know, they give it their own kind of institutional treatment as well. So, and I think they even produced, I think it was in Siena. I think they produced like kind of a giant carpet or something of like the poster as well, which I was like, oh, that's something I'd never,
Wow.
we would never think of doing, of course, but maybe it's something that reflects kind of their institutional ethos or their kind of way of promoting things. So
Actually, very good. And that leads into someone here said super work. And then Chris, what strengths did your partners bring to the project?
So they would have brought, let me think how I can, so certainly the guys from Atlante who I suppose we would have had our most kind of communication with, because this was really, they were the lead partners on this as well. So they had a strong connection, I guess, with the Institute for the Blind in Milan, who were so essential to this. I think just to get you into that first mindset, I mean, that first kind of visit going on over where we spent 2 days with them, and we talked about program planning and how the project would be realized. But we also spent a lot of time just thinking about like, what is the experience of being a visually impaired person, and how you can communicate that, and how it feels to be visually impaired through all these kind of workshops and activities, and of course it just makes you realize that like, well, this is really important stuff. This is something quite essential to us. So that was, I think, was kind of invaluable to it. And Atlante as well have done. I mean, they're kind of more like an arts agency, I guess, than kind of a physical institution. So they have worked on a number of kind of big projects with other foundations or kind of estates of artists in the past as well. So they had, I guess, the kind of nous to kind of bring these kind of divergent strands together. And also to kind of, I guess, kind of apportion responsibilities in kind of a good way. I mean, I think one of the benefits of an institution like that or an agency like that is they can think a little bit beyond their own kind of gallery or their own region, and they can kind of connect the dots in a good way. So yeah, I thought that was quite a useful kind of beneficial thing to have someone there who's kind of thinking of. And I should also say they're leading on the forthcoming project that we have as well. So. This is obviously has always been built into their kind of plan to like, how can we, take our projects for the visually impaired and really kind of expand them and push them further. So yeah, it's a mission for them, I think.
Very good. And then another question, again, Chris, thanks for the presentation, fantastic project. Do you think you gained in your own professional development by being involved? And if so, what were the main impacts for you?
Yeah, so certainly, it gives you a greater awareness of the different kind of audiences that you're dealing with. And also I think the idea of kind of tactility is important. Is important one. We did a little side exhibition that kind of coincided with Vibe that was all about kind of tactility and contemporary Irish art as well, where we asked 4 Irish artists to make things that were kind of kind of haptic, that you could kind of engage with in a different kind of non-visual way. I think that's kind of interesting thing as well, that like we tend to prioritize kind of vision so much in visual arts. I mean, it's built into the name that it tends to sideline some of these kind of things of like, well, what is that feeling of kind of putting your hands on artwork, or the smell of an artwork, or the auditory experience, which is something that we're also kind of pushing a little bit more, I think, now, is this idea of having kind of audio guides. We even just, there's a little bit, I will kind of go off on little tangents here, but we launched an exhibition yesterday, which was a citywide exhibition of artist posters, where people can go on little walking routes and experience different artworks. And of course, one of the first things we're thinking of is like, okay, well, as people are walking with their headphones in, how do we kind of communicate messages about the artwork to them when you don't have labels, for example, next to the works? And so I think just that idea of kind of building in, like, what are the different ways to kind of communicate the message and the experience of the exhibition, and also to be so sensitive, I think, to that embodied encounter. I think where artworks is kind of huge for us, and to realize that not all of our audiences are just this kind of set of eyes looking at artworks, that they have different ways of kind of encountering this stuff. So it just makes you a little bit more aware, I think, of what is your audience your audiences are anticipating, or how they experience these things.
Very good. Another question here. What was the timeline between the first meeting with your EU partners and the moment the application and project took place? That's a lot of steps in there, but I think
Let me think. Boy, it's going back. I mean, it must have been at least, could it have been like a year, 18 months or something, probably, from the first. I mean, there were a lot of initial emails going back and forth, I think, as the project was coming together. And then when, it's very. I'd really have to kind of go back and kind of check through the timeline. I think, yeah, but there was a fair amount of lead in when there was a lot of talk about this project. You know, like we should apply for this. So I
Like
think
a year
I
or
think
2
even a year,
years?
like I think
Yeah.
a year probably before the application went in, we were kind of in quite extensive dialogue about like, this is what we're applying for and this is what we need. This is what we need to prepare. And of course, I mean, like any institution, we apply for a number of things and sometimes they come through and sometimes they don't. But then of course, when you get, you know, you get that kind of, that letter of success,
It's worth it.
everything ramps up so quickly as well. So then it was like, okay, we need to get over to, we need to get to Milan and have a meeting there with them. We need
So you
to
did
start.
travel to meet your partners in person.
Yeah, we did the initial kind of first meeting in Milan, myself and Fiona, the director of the Glucksman, and met the Atlante team. We hosted them in Cork as well when we opened up the show as well. And then there was another trip. I think I didn't go to the one in Siena. My colleagues went to that one, and then Zagreb as well. So we kind of saw between us as a team, we saw all the different venues, and there was a lot of kind of phone, Skype, obviously, you know, a lot of emailing, stuff like that, back and forth, and a lot of also even post exhibition things. You know, there's that tendency to kind of go, oh, the exhibition's over in our venue. We send it on, and you kind of forget about it. But of course, all the kind of reporting and like we did like a flash book and the films, and so, you know, and getting stuff translated from Italian into English, and I guess somebody also translating that and then into Croatian as well. So yeah, there was a kind of a long time lag, but certainly it was a year, I think, before the application went in. And then from the application, you're talking about it another year as it kind of unfolds.
So it's a long-term process. And can you claim back the expenses for that travel then when you get the project funding, or where did that?
I think that was built into the Atlante's initial, that there would be
the
some
lead partners.
the lead partner would have had it in there.
Okay.
So yeah, they would have handled a lot of that stuff that I guess was kind of cross-institutional as well. So even, you know, I'm looking at the screen here with the picture of the Braille catalog, which is something which very much is their initiative. But also even they're the ones who then had to manage things like, okay, so there has to be an English Braille version, an Italian Braille version, and a Croatian Braille version.
It's a lot of work.
But because they work in that field, you know, working with the guys in the Institute for the Blind, you know, they can make those kind of things happen. They can find the right people to do it. They can find the right printers. But of course, stuff like that just takes, you can imagine how long it takes to even put all that stuff together. So in addition to all this kind of sideline stuff of us putting together exhibitions, there are the publishing side of things. There's the website needs to go up. So yes, I'd say definitely give it as much time as you can spare.
Okay, I think we might have time for just 2 more questions.
Sure.
So were there any opportunities for Irish artists on the VI project, or was it just contained within the Albers exhibition?
There was. So, you know, that's one of our kind of priorities, is that, you know, we're Irish and international galleries. So one thing we did, and this, of course, is separate from Vibe, but we wanted to do a parallel exhibition that I'd mentioned there about with 4 Irish artists. So we did a show called Please Touch, which is kind of, you know, because the Albers, the Vibe exhibition is kind of quite different from what we'd usually do. So we wanted to have something that was maybe kind of a contemporary show, kind of, you know, artists that within the country, kind of working with different materials. So we did a little 4-person show with Rona Byrne and Maud Cotter, Richard Forrest and Katie Watchorn, who each had in very different ways these kind of tactile, interactive, participatory works. And then also through the education program, of course, we work with so many Irish artists, even if they're not exhibiting per se as part of the kind of larger exhibition. You know, people like Claire McLaughlin and Darren Thorne, and I have just a gigantic list of them all, who are really, you know, artists as well that, you know, we would go back to and work quite often with as part of our kind of core education stuff. But in this instance, actually, we were able to use some of the co-funding as well to kind of, with Fritz and with Claire, to implement kind of like teacher and artist training as well. So that they could actually kind of hopefully adapt some of these kind of principles and some of these practices into their own work. So.
Okay. And then if someone's asking, did you work with the National Council for the Blind of Ireland or the National Braille Production Centre? And
I don't think we did. I had to check with my colleague about that because he was the liaison for a number of these guys. It was our education curator, but I don't think so. I don't think there was that connection. Actually, I don't want to put words in his mouth here now, but I do remember there was a conversation he was telling me about Braille in particular. So maybe he did have this conversation and this idea that that there is a kind of a dialogue around the longevity of Braille as a way of reading, and with developments in kind of audio and technology and stuff like that. So I have to double check on that, but it's quite possible that he did have some communication. So
okay, and then I think we'll take one last question, and this is obviously topical given the current issues around mobility. Would this have presented challenges to planning and collaborating with your partners?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you know, in the current climate, I think a tactile exhibition would probably be the last thing you're supposed to be doing anyways.
Oh, yeah.
But in general, I mean, this is obviously something that we're working out and other institutions are working out, is how we're going to manage to do. I mean, to do exhibitions, installing exhibitions per se is going to be difficult enough, but when you're talking about international transport and works touring, and of course these are, you know, you might be able to touch a Joseph Albers painting in this exhibition, but at the same time, you know, you're probably not allowed to disinfect it or kind of run a cloth over it or anything like that. So I mean, that is something that like everybody's going to have to kind of find a way of working through. I think we're not there yet, but then I don't know if anyone else is. We're just kind of very closely watching. And trying to get a temperature of things and see how other institutions who are maybe a little bit ahead of Ireland are readapting, and just try and use the best practices we can find out there.
That's great. Okay, thank you very much. I think we're out of time, so I'll hand back over to Katie. So thanks, Chris.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm just getting the presentation up now. So now we're going to hear from Maoliosa Boyle, the Executive Director of Rua Red, and Joyce Dunne, the Development Manager, about the UCED project. And what I think is really interesting, there's a couple of things. The first is that they are a lead. They were one of our first leads, but really the key point is that both Joyce and Maoliosa inherited this project. So it had been developed and the application made under previous people within Rua Red. So they kind of start their roles, or Maoliosa comes into the role and inherits this enormous thing, a lead on a European project. And what's been amazing to see is how it's developed and grown throughout the 3 years of the project. So I'll just hand over to Maoliosa and Joyce, and we'll follow the same format with questions at the end. Thanks very much.
Okay, hi everybody. This is the first time that myself and Joyce have kind of been together over the last 3 months. So it's very strange doing a presentation together. But thank you, Creative Europe, for inviting us to do this presentation. It actually made me incredibly nostalgic whenever I was creating the presentation, because we have just finished our project after 3 years. And it was a really wonderful project for us to inherit. As Katie said, both myself and Joyce stepped into our roles after the application was made. And so it was a very, very different job, I think, from what both of ourselves imagined. But I suppose the really good thing about it, and I think that this is important for people to hear as well, is that we inherited this project, but we also made it our own. You know, we tailored it to suit the organisation and the new direction of the organisation, and we had great backing and support to do that. So I think that that's really important to say at this stage. So first of all, I'll just tell you a bit about what UCED is, just in case anybody isn't aware. So UCED is a 3-year digital arts project which is funded by Creative Europe and led by South Dublin Arts Centre Company Ireland, which is essentially Rua Red, in partnership with the municipality of Belfort in France and the municipality of, excuse me, Rosecki in Latvia. The three spaces involved in the partnership were Rua Red South Dublin Arts Centre, ourselves as the lead partner, Lisbas Multimedia at Gantner in Boroin, and Lisnava Manor in Rezekne in the Lekal region of Latvia. I'll just go on to the next slide, which Joyce is going to say a few things about in terms of mobility in general.
Oh, okay. So I'm Joyce. I am the development manager for Rua Red, and for the CED project, I acted as the communications manager for the project and also the leader. So yeah, this code comes from our final mobility report. It captures what mobility really is all about, and it's a central component of the professional trajectory of artists and cultural professionals, involving a temporary cross-border movement, often for educational, capacity building, networking, or working purposes. It may have tangible or intangible outputs in the short term and be party of a long-term professional development process. Mobility is a conscious process, and those involved in it, whether directly engaging in it or by supporting it, should take into consideration its cultural, social, political, environment, ethical, and economic implications. And I suppose the thing about the CED project is that from the start, we decided that it should be very much artist focused. This project put artists at the centre of it. The two key policy areas that CED sought to address in order of priority were transnational mobility and audience development. So we addressed transnational mobility through a really comprehensive programme of exhibitions, residencies, travel awards, mobility visits, and a number of events and workshops, quite a number of events and workshops in our partner countries and online. We facilitated the movement of artists and cultural professionals, enabling them to cooperate internationally and internationalise their careers. It facilitated the transnational circulation of cultural and creative works, many of which were newly commissioned for the project. A key success indicator has also been the growth of a network of digital artists. There are approximately 150 registered profiles of digital artists on the CED platform, and over 100 members of a social media group where people interact and opportunities, news, and resources are kind of regularly posted. Second to that, audience development was our second priority. So a key aspect was generating new audiences for the partners and making digital arts practices more accessible to non-arts audiences. We facilitated audiences to interact with a huge variety of artistic practices through symposiums, talks, public workshops, and each partner we recognized needed a different focus and a different strategy for audience development. So in rural Latvia, audiences were really looking at digital artworks quite often for the first time, and we're asking questions such as, is this art and what is it? And then in France, our partners were a dedicated digital arts institution, so its audiences were quite accustomed to digital art, and the priority there was to deepen their relationship with their audiences. And for us in Ireland, our strategy was to really diversify our audiences and to look at addressing different groups. So with a focus on transnational working, I think all the parties benefited from linking up and marketing and supporting each other. We offered audiences within Europe and internationally greater access to wider practices. And I think this network has had a greater impact on our organisations, our artists, our local community spirit, and it's resulted in really deep, solid bonds between us, which I think will go on into the future.
Is there a bit of feedback on my mic there?
Hi. Sounds okay here.
Okay. So forgive us if we are crossing over in some things here in terms of what we're speaking about. I'm going to just go through some of these slides quite quickly. So just come back to what UCEDA was. UCEDA stands for European Connections in Digital Art. It was a 3-year creative Europe project, which was funded between 2016 and 2019. And as I said before, our partners were in 3 countries, and we had 3 partners in Ireland, France, and Latvia. I think it's probably important for us to speak about our partners a bit because they form such a massively interesting part of the project in terms of where they were placed physically, and how that really affected our thinking around the project. So both Boulogne in France and Rosecny are located near borders. Espace Multimédia Gantler is situated in France, near the borders of Germany and Switzerland. And the Snava Manor is situated in Latvia, which is just 63 kilometers away from the Russian border. Both spaces and places are incredibly interesting because of this. They make up a kind of confluence of histories and politics and cultures, which we really grabbed onto in terms of what we were addressing within Rua Red. This created great synergy within the project in terms of where they were placed physically. And also I think it's important to kind of reflect on the populations of each of the places that we worked with. Rosecny has a population of 27,000, so it's a fairly small kind of town, and Boulogne had just the population of 1,924. So very, very small spaces and places in comparison to South Dublin County at around 250,000. So this, I think, made for really, really interesting work between all partners. Joyce has covered a bit of this before in terms of just, increased mobility. UCEDA set out to connect an interactive and innovative community of digital media and technology artists, curators, researchers, and cultural workers to imagine new ways of creating work, platforming work, and making connections and networking internationally to share thoughts, ideas, and experiences through exhibitions, symposium, talks, workshops, both on and offline. UCEDA really aimed to make digital arts accessible and bring a wider public interaction with arts and technology through an ambitious programme of exhibitions and events. And Joyce has talked about those various different parts that we would have covered within the 3-year project. UCEDA, like a massive part of it, was around mobility. It aimed to create and support new travel opportunities for artists to expand their practice through research, attending symposiums and festivals, and taking part in exhibitions. And again, I'm returning to the 3 places because they formed such a massive part of the project, and because they were all so different, I think it's important to talk about them. Lisnava Manor in Latvia near the Russian border, where a lot of our work was placed whenever we visited there, and indeed our last conference. It has had an incredibly rich and varied life. It was built in the early 1900s and is a really unusual example of romantic Art Nouveau architecture. It's surrounded by a 20-acre park. And even in terms of like our placing in Rua Red, I think it's really significant to point out the differences in places and in terms of where you're working. Throughout the last 120 years, it was a cultural centre. It was actually a headquarter to the Russian Imperial Army. It was the home of the Soviet and German Army headquarters. And more recently, again, it's been turned into a cultural centre. With, I suppose, within the visual arts, you're working with spaces. So we brought a number of exhibitions to the spaces in Latvia and France. And for us, one of the main challenges, but one of the most incredibly interesting part of the project was working within these spaces. So to bring a contemporary digital art project to Lisnava Manor was a massive challenge, but it was also incredibly rewarding. And that you can see by these slides that, it's a listed building. It has been restored to its former glory. So there was a lot to work with. We couldn't put nails into the walls. We had to, really address that, which made it like, it was a fantastic thing for the artists to get the opportunity to do is to work within a space like this. this is just one of our events that we held. I think it was the first exhibition that we had in the manor. Our project leaders within Latvia were incredible. They really embraced the project wholeheartedly. There was massive celebrations within the area and the municipality where they brought bands and speakers and Latvian dancers at every opportunity. So yeah, it was a fantastic space to work in.
I think it's worth mentioning as well that this was a small scale project. It was a sub €200,000 category, and what has been remarkable about Latvia is the impact that what is a small project has had on the whole region. And I think we'll probably talk more about that afterwards. But in terms of the watching it grow in the region over the 3 years has been one of the most rewarding parts of the whole project for me personally. Anyway.
Yeah, and for me as well. So our next space is in the small village of Bronya, the Spas Multimedia Gantner. A very, very different space that was purpose-built in 1998 to serve the wider community, or the small community of Bronya and Belfort. They have the largest archive of digital arts in France. They're very, very tailored in terms of responding directly to their community. But it's a purpose-built space, incredibly different from our previous space in Latvia and Lesnava Manor. They're used to producing digital art shows. They had a blacked out space, so our artists went in and it was no problem for them to work there. Just a very, very different approach. All of their events were incredibly well attended by and supported by local community. It was fantastic for our artists to go in there because they had such a massive library and archive, which was just completely dedicated to digital arts.
The exhibition program itself was there was 3 exhibitions. We want 1 exhibition in each venue, touring in year 1 and year 2, and then an exhibition in Lesnava in year 3. And we should mention as well the curators, Matthew Nevin from Mart, who was the UCED curator in residence for year 1, and Nora Muraku from at the time University of Limerick and now Transmedial director, who was the curator in residence for year 2, and then Rasha Schmidt was our curator for year 3. So just to mention those names there as well.
Let's speak briefly just about our own space. I'm receiving a lot of feedback there. So Rua Red is a contemporary art space. It houses 2 galleries, a theatre, cinema, a dance studio, and a conference room, recording facilities, music rooms, workshop areas, artist studios, office spaces, and a cafe. Again, it's a very, very different space from the other organisations that we've worked with. As I said previously, I stepped into the role of director in 2017, and Joyce was just a few months ahead of me. And at that time, we really changed the direction of the organisation in terms of programming and curating the exhibitions. We now exhibit the work of established Irish and international artists who are committed to producing work within a social political framework. The education programme reflects the organisation's interests with place, politics and people through a challenging programme of events, workshops, screenings and performances. It was at the start of UCED and whenever we were exploring the new direction for Rua Red, to be quite honest, it was quite difficult marrying both projects together because we had inherited a digital arts project and yet we were on this new trajectory with the organisation. And so there was definitely a space of time that we had to really address both things in terms of the direction on our own programming and the UCED project. And I think successfully, really in year 2 and year 3, we got to know the project better we got to know our partners better, and we successfully kind of tailored the project to very much fit in with our remit and our ethos, but also our partners' remits and ethos as well. Rua Red is a purpose-built space again, like multimedia, Gantner, and that we have a white cube space is very, very easy to work within. It's an artist's delight whenever they come into the space. There aren't many challenges that they have to work with. I'll just say a bit about our budget, because I know that it has come up with Chris's in terms of what our total budget was. And Joyce, you might want to come in as well in terms of just some of our additional funders. So we had a total budget of 326,000, which represented, we had 200,000 from Creative Europe, which is about 58.14%. Each of our partners agreed to self-finance as agreed in the corporation agreement and project budget as follows. So we had match funding from our own council, from South Dublin Arts Centre, from Belfort Municipality and Rosecne Municipality as well. We also had some funding in Rua Red, which is made up from Culture Ireland, Arts Council Ireland, and South Dublin County Council. Joyce, do you want to add to that, maybe?
Yeah, so as we mentioned, we inherited the project. So the commitment for Rua Red to fund 50,000 euros out of our own budgets was in place before we started, as were the other commitments from the other partners. We were invited by the Arts Council to apply for the co-funding award, which offset a significant amount of that 50,000 euros that Rua Red was to self-finance. So that really then frees us up in terms of being able to kind of use that money for really expanding the programme. We also then received other funding from Culture Ireland in terms of bringing Irish artwork abroad, and our council at the time of the application had committed to providing an annual co-fund towards the project. So that's really what ours was made of. But each partner then, Belfort and Rosecne, would then have been looking to from their departments, from their other networks, looking to offset their own financial commitment as well.
So whenever myself and Joyce stepped into the role, there was a lot of kind of project deliverables. And I should also mention that we had a project manager who was already in place, Anita Griffin, who was fantastic throughout the whole process and delivery of the project, and she really brought everything together, and she had a huge amount just ready for us whenever we stepped into our roles. But I have to say, you know, the project deliverables over 3 years, given that we had many other projects within the organisation, seemed quite daunting at the time in terms of planning what the next 3 years would look like. So what we had to deliver over 3 years was 1 web-based platform, 21 mobility visits, 9 artist residencies, 18 artist residency discussions, 3 artist residency peer groups, 2 co-curator residencies, 1 international conference, 1 digital library, 6 parallel exhibitions, 54 workshops, 2 curator and artist exhibition discussions. So, you know, the way that we approached that is that we kind of came up, I suppose, with a plan, which you can see, which is a timeline of key activities then over the 3 years to make that possible. And, you know, I should say that we covered all of our deliverables in the end and a bit more, you know, because we linked we linked the UCEDA project in with some other projects that we were delivering here, like our Glitch digital festival. We linked UCEDA in with that. So there's different ways that you can make it work within your program, and it's gone by in a flash, all of these deliverables as well. So you can see how we broke it up in over the 3 years in terms of just our partner meetings, our project launches, our residencies. We had residencies each year in each country. So we would have a residency in Ireland and in Latvia and France. So even, the administration of that, where we would send out a call for artists to apply for the residencies, and then, each of the partners would sit down with us online and discuss the proposals and come up with the most appropriate residencies that would fit each of our spaces. So all of these processes are really interesting because you're reading artists' ideas about forthcoming projects that they have, very hard decisions to make, but some of them were very much down to kind of practical decisions in terms of what would work within each organization, down to traveling, what each artist's requirements were, and it had to be also quite tailored towards the place. And that was the reason for choosing to go to Latvia, was to maybe explore the history of Lisnava Manor, or they wanted to use, say, the digital archive in Espace Multimedia. So yeah, we worked through all of our deliverables and created this, an incredible program around it. Our main then activities, as Joyce has covered before, were based around mobility, networking, education, and network building. Mobility covered our travel awards, our residencies, and some of our exhibitions. Networking was our travel awards. Many of us attended festivals in order to represent the project. We spoke at symposiums, and we had our exhibitions as well. We had a number of educational workshops and talks and symposiums throughout the 3 years. And we had many collaborations in all 3 countries with colleges and schools. We created a lot of network building through our attendance at conferences. And what we would have done was we would have met with our partners at the conferences where we would speak about UCEDA, but we would also have our team meetings at those various different locations. One of the things, I suppose, that we found that, and we've grown so accustomed within these last 3 months to having Zoom conversations, but nothing makes up for having the people actually in the room with you in order to achieve an awful lot. And I think that was one of our real learning out of this process is, we one meeting in person with our partners would achieve so much in comparison to 10 Zoom calls. Okay, this is one of the festivals that we attended. We attended quite a lot of festivals ourselves and our team over the 3 years. This one was Transmedial in Berlin. We also attended Resonate in Serbia. Trying to think of some of the others. Strasbourg, Biennial, many ones over the years. These are just some examples of the educational workshops. This one was in Latvia. Latvia purchased a laser cutter, so they did a number of educational workshops within the area, both in schools and colleges, and we'll speak a bit more just about the impact of that later. And as I said before, we delivered, some of our deliverables within our own program, and this was workshops as part of our Glitch Festival in Rua Red. Towards the end of the project, we gathered a lot of, well, right throughout the project, we gathered a lot of participant feedback from the various participants within it, you know, from our travel award participants, from our symposium attendees, from our residency artists. So I thought it would be good just to put up some of the feedback from them. A lot of them are positive responses, and many reflecting on similar findings, such as the international similarities between all artists' circumstances and the challenges that each face. It was being relieved of their financial concerns through travel awards and residencies, being able to afford time off to make work, that they were just focused on their work, being able to focus within a specialised field of work, and also it was gaining more of an international profile through travel, networking, and the promotion of work through exhibitions and talks. How their work has been developed and promoted through the project, and in some instances taken to another stage of development. And we had one really good example of an emerging artist, Santa France from Latvia. He was part of one of our exhibitions, and Santa's work was spotted within the UCED exhibition and purchased. And she also got some funding for another exhibition after that. So it was a really, really positive output for Santa. Joyce, would you like to add anything to that? Joyce, I think your mic is maybe off.
Apologies. No, just to add to that, Santa actually then became the face of European funding in Latvia, as a kind of a spokesperson for the positive impacts that European funding can have on careers. So that was a really unexpected outcome from the project.
At the end of the project, we produced a mobility report, and part of the mobility report was really looking at the impact of UCED. And we literally mapped it out within a map just to see in terms of how far reaching it was. Now that's taken into consideration where our exhibitions were, where each of our residencies were, where the travel awards took some of the individual artists. So you can see, it's a bit light here, but you can see, you know, in terms of exactly where UCED has impacted within Europe. And you know, it's a nice thing for us to see that we have sent individual artists out to their various projects that develop their practice.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. I'm just popping in because there's quite a few questions and we're a little bit over time and I want to get to them. So I'm kind of just giving a bit of a 2-minute warning.
Okay. We'll rattle through this quite quickly then. I thought it would be important just for us to say, because I know many of you are maybe thinking about making applications, and just in terms of maybe bits of advice in terms of positive elements of our project, things that we might change in the future, and real kind of learning elements. So the positive elements of the project were that it brought together and connected international artists and curators. It platformed emerging artists. It provided jobs and career opportunities. It supported local businesses. Kind of a lot of these things we expected it to do. Some of the difficulties that we had to overcome, as both myself and Joyce have said before, is we were not part of the original planning for the project. Our partners had a different way of reporting their finances, which kind of very much linked in with their own council. And sometimes this can lead to unrealistic deliverables against the resources and human resources available, delays and tax-related issues. Having to operate within the 10% variances only in budgets is difficult. However, it also allows for a degree of flexibility, especially given the significant rate of inflation since the application was submitted 4 years ago. And I think that is really important, that you should allow for this within your budget. And I think Chris touched on this before, the importance of art translators, that we hadn't really thought of, how important it is to translate into each of the partner languages that you're working with. And also what we find, and Joyce can speak a bit more about this, is that there are the nuances within arts language sometimes aren't properly kind of reflected if you employ a generic translator. It has to be someone who understands the language of art.
And it's completely, it's something that once you've planned for it is very easy to overcome. But yeah, it was a challenge. First off was finding those translators who had the vocabulary, had the language in both English and Latvian or French to be able to give the text the translation that they deserved. So yeah, that is something just to bear in mind in terms of planning. You need to find the right people for that early on.
So some of the lessons that we have learned is be realistic about your deliverables, so that quality is better than quantity, and value for money is never a valid argument within the arts. Factor in contingency funding for price rises within transportation, food, travel, accommodation. Transportation for us was a major thing because we were working with Latvia and trying to transport work to Latvia incurs massive transportation costs. So that absolutely fed into the choice of work that we could exhibit within some of our spaces. Be realistic about your human resources and what is required for quality delivery. Practical timelines. I know somebody in the chat has asked about the 3 parallel exhibitions. That was extremely difficult. We delivered it, but having the 3 exhibitions in 3 countries at the same time was quite difficult. The good translators keeps coming up again and again for us, so I put that across. This is costly and often not factored into the budget. And also, but one of the real positives is you can tailor the project. And also technology is ever changing. So maybe what is in your original proposal for us, that was really important because it was a digital arts project. What is in your original proposal in terms of some of the deliverables, like apps, just, you know, with technology changing, it's no longer current and widely used. So some of our unplanned, we had our planned tangible outputs, but some of our unplanned tangible outputs was absolutely the knowledge impact on the Rosecne area and the cultural skills building within the Rosecne area in Latvia. For us and for our French partners, Latvia was the complete gem of the project. The project impacted so far and wide that it created a new digital arts module within the curriculum in the local Rosecne College, and now they have an annual exhibition every year in the Snava Manor. And you know, listening, I think one of the things that you miss out in a presentation is like this is kind of hearing from our partners, and to hear from our partner in Latvia is just so rewarding in terms of exactly what they have gained from UCED. And I think as well, our connections and networks, as Joyce said before, are absolutely for life now. You know, we adored the project. It started off as something that was incredibly difficult for us to inherit, but it was fantastic and so rewarding. So yeah, you know, what we have gained out of it is a huge network of connections and, you know, friends kind of for life as well. These images are just some of the work that was produced by the local college, who used the laser cutter as well. So these were the unexpected outcome, is that this has become a massive part of their curriculum now. And that, I think, was us on one of our last days at at our conference. I know we've probably gone way over time, so apologies for that.
I just say it's brilliant. It's so clear, even for us in our role, to see how you've laid everything out has been amazing. So I know there are a lot of questions, so I'll just hand over to Leona, just to maybe moderate the questions, and I'll turn myself off now.
Okay. Thanks, Maoliosa and Joyce. Yeah, that's so comprehensive. I think people will get the slides because there's so much information in there. And I think you might have answered a lot of the questions here, but I'll just pick out some of the interesting ones. So you were saying that your Latvian partner was a gem. So people were wondering, how did you find your partners? What kind of institutions were they? Were they artist-led or local authority?
Yeah, we'll answer this as well as we can, because yeah, myself and Joyce entered into the project, you know, and the partners had already been established at that time. From our knowledge, the project was pitched, I think, in 2015 in Brussels by the previous director of Rua Red, who herself and the market manager had really envisaged the whole project. So they had pitched it in Brussels, and I think originally there were maybe 6 partners, and then we're going to 2 partners.
Okay. And then there's a question, was there extra funding for exhibitions that you ran? The open call said 500 max per project. I'm not really sure what that is, but is this for the artist calls?
The travel award stipends would be 500 euro.
Yeah.
And there were how many of those? There
21 of those.
Okay.
21, but I think we over delivered on those as well.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, that would have been, and we were actually commended in a recent mobility report done looking at all the different travel awards across Europe, and it was actually the only one that was open enough that artists could literally apply to go to what they wanted to go to. It wasn't hooked on to an event or a specific purpose, but they could actually identify an opportunity themselves and come to us and go, oh, I see there's a benefit to my career in attending this. So I think that was a real plus as well.
Excellent. So it's very open to that. And then another question is, was UCED a very curator-centered project?
Yes, well, we selected 3 different curators over the 3 years. We would have worked very, very closely with each of the curators in terms of, you know, having an input as the lead partner. So there would have been many conversations and discussions around that time. So yeah, in a way, yeah, it was kind of curator-led, but with input from ourselves.
Okay. And did you notice any difference between the level of experience between artists and curators across the project and partners?
I suppose each kind of approached it within their own way, which is really refreshing. It's like working with any curator, you know, they each bring their own skills to it. So yeah, I suppose, yeah, just different ways of working.
Yeah.
Make for
And in terms of
different exhibitions.
And in terms of the artists who would have been in the exhibitions, there was a mix of emerging practices and people much further down their career path. So yeah, no, I think it was certainly a mix.
So it was, artist-led in a way too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a question here, was the project manager working full-time to try and evaluate how much time was needed?
No. She wasn't. Anita worked 2 days a week in Rua Red. So, you know, we tried to have those specific days towards the UCED project when possible, which is often quite difficult because we have about 9 core staff here who work across kind of core administration and programming. And we have a very busy building. We have a very busy program, and UCED was one of those programs. So, yeah, you really have to try, and you absolutely, what I would say is you absolutely need a dedicated person to oversee it without a doubt, and just coordinate everything together. But you need to have dedicated days for focusing on that project as well.
Okay, and I think that goes some way to answering the question about how did the project sit within your national programme. So it takes work to do that.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you were writing the application from the start, you would have a different approach to it. So, you know, I think that we definitely kind of tailored it and changed different elements where the project, and definitely within the last 2 years, had a focus on the three partners and the places and the locations, and that kind of very much fitted in with our own programme around place and people and politics.
Okay.
And, you know, very naturally, the history of both places and where they are positioned geographically, that Rezekne is positioned near the Russian border. There is still very visible Soviet influences within the town. It's really interesting. Half of it is Latvian, half is Russian. So there are all of those dynamics that exist within the place. And then in Belfort and Bologna, again, it kind of sits very, very near the German and Swiss border. So there's a lot of influences there. So, you know, it was there. It was there very, very naturally in terms of kind of fitting within our wider programme. And, you know, interestingly enough, we had some really interesting discussions around kind of the politics of place throughout the project and towards the end. So there are definite similarities that we would like to continue on with our partners.
Okay, very good. And then someone asked, so were the artists selected only from Ireland, France and Latvia, and were the mobility grants just to move between partnering organisations?
The residencies were, so they were just between partnering organisations, but the mobility grants were open to really go anywhere, as long as we seen that it was developing their practice in some way, whether it was through research, attending a symposium, or going to an exhibition that would help develop their practice, or indeed they're putting on their own work.
Okay, and I think maybe one more question. Someone's saying very well done. So overall, what do you think the benefits of being in the project were outweigh maybe all the work that had to be done?
Oh, many things. Many things, you know, I think it's changed ultimately the way that we work, the way that we think about creating work. Yeah, just working kind of internationally and how you communicate with people. You know, all of those kind of interpersonal skills. But also, you know, as I mentioned before, that kind of placing work within different spaces which aren't purpose-built. Like we are so used to walking into like a white cube here and everything, but you know, working with the history of a place and the architecture was one of the real, you know, rewards for visual artists going into Latvia as well.
I think the relationships and the connections formed will go on to benefit the organisation for years to come. I think that's something it is those international connections and just kind of thinking broader and bigger that changes your approach to how you do things.
Right. Okay, I think that wraps it up. And again, there's lots of comments here saying well done and congrats. So I think we'll hand back to Katie and we can get on with the rest of the seminar.
Hi everyone, sorry, I just have to, it opened at the beginning. So we are kind of running a bit short on time. So I just want to kind of say that obviously this isn't the only time you can hear this information. Aoife and myself are always there at the, you know, the end of the phone and kind of there. So I'll get through as much of it as I can. Really, this part of the presentation is because a lot of the people we deal with are really looking for pathways to the type of projects we've heard from today, because they are kind of very large scale, relatively large scale, and they require a lot of kind of development and organizational capacity and administrative capacity. So really here I'm looking at some of the ways that maybe smaller organizations or even individuals can start engaging with European funding. So just, overall, while the funding we've heard from today is really only open to organizations and organizations working at a certain level in some ways, really the aim and at the core of all of the European Commission's funding for culture are individuals, are its citizens. And in the case of Creative Europe, it's really about kind of artists and ensuring that artists have sustainable careers. It's looking at their professional development and their practice. So, it is kind of saying that while the projects themselves, can be administered by organizations, it is artists that benefit. And you saw that with UCED. So I'll just kind of quickly run through. So really, we're going to start talking about Creative Europe networks. So networks, at the moment, there's currently 28 that are funded by the European Commission all across Europe, and they cover every arts and culture sector. So this is the principle of a cascading grant. So the European Commission will fund a network who will then provide training and opportunities to the wider European sector. And one of the things with this crazy time we're living through is that a lot of these networks have networking, have conferences, have masterclasses, have talks that are actually free. So, really, if this is the time to start looking and maybe engaging with a European network, while it's easy to do so. So networks themselves are open to both individuals and organizations to be a member. So they will all have sliding scales of fees. So if you are a very small organization or you're an individual artist, then your fee will reflect that. A lot of times this is how people start first engaging with European networking, finding partners, and we have a few examples of people that have come through that pathway. So one is Ormston House, based in Limerick. They initially were a member of a network, and now they're on their second cooperation project as a partner. So we've done a lot of promoting around this, and we have seen an increase in network membership from here in Ireland, which you can see in the latest round. There's 109 Irish members. A significant number of those are individuals involved in 18 of the 28 networks. Here we're just going to look at some things that are would be of interest now, because the current Creative Europe program has cooperation projects have finished. So there won't be a new deadline probably until early 2021. So we're going to talk now. I've actually had quite a few interests. They've had one round under the European Cultural Foundation Solidarity Fund, which was actually launched in response to COVID. The European Cultural Foundation really aligns very closely with Creative Europe in that it's really there to promote and strengthen European solidarity, to really kind of promote social and cultural integration across Europe. So it's a really interesting organization that people anyway should be looking at, but now they have this specific solidarity fund because they've identified this period of time when essentially borders are closed, mobility has stopped, as a time that could threaten European solidarity. So this fund is to address that. It's open to individuals and organizations. They have a sliding scale of award levels. So from very small, I think from 5,000 up to 50,000. You can be involved in a partnership, or you can be involved without a partnership. It's a good one to think about if you are planning or in your mind you're developing a larger European partnership project. This can almost be your test for some of those ideas and some of those partnerships, because it aligns quite clearly. So Opportunists, I'm sure a lot of you saw this last year. And what's amazing is, I think if Kate Deans from Scotland is still here, this is what the Creative Europe desk and the sectors have been crying out for ages, is are there any, kind of smaller awards open for individuals? And iPortunis is what the European Commission proposed. They cannot introduce any new funding within the set 7 years of the program. So this is seen as a pilot. So it was last year, there were 3 rounds. This year it will go ahead, but they're obviously having to adapt it in light of COVID. So this was an amazing development for everyone, and even for our work. But come 2021, when the new program launches, it will become a permanent action. So there were 7 successful Irish applications. I think one was as a collective. And their website, which I'll just make a note to send you all after, you can research all, they've published all the statistics about all these mobilities, and it's interesting reading. So I'll send that on after as well. Oh, sorry, I've shut myself out. This one is interesting, and I'm really going to kind of gloss over this because it's not a huge amount of information. Again, my colleague Kate suggested this, and I'll pin it on the chat. But the new European Commissioner, Mariah Gabriel, who is Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, has a newsletter. And this is where we all first heard this in one of her announcements. So I'm just going to pin it and I'll send it out after. Hold on. But definitely sign up for this. Obviously, we'll have news on all these funds when they come. But essentially, this is another small test. So the new program is probably going to be, as Aoife said, broadly the same, but one of the things that the Commission might do is actually have more of a targeted approach, recognizing that certain sectors have really unique needs. So one of the ones is obviously, you might have seen some of the things around Music Moves Europe. So recognizing music has a specific, kind of series of, I guess, obstacles or problems, or however you want to say. Performing arts is another one they talk about, but this is going to be similar to iPortunis, a small kind of test. And it's looking at European mobilities. In this year, it will be virtual mobilities and digital culture and training. So we don't know much more. It was meant to be launched by now. So just kind of keep an eye on our channels. And again, maybe sign up for the Commissioner's newsletter as well. This is another one. So this is kind of, they have, the European Commission won't be administering this themselves. They put a call out for an organization or a consortium of organizations to run this. And again, there'll be more information, but this would be for activities starting from October. This is a really interesting one. And it is recognizing, I think the thing is the Commission recognizes and wants to kind of develop, but the Creative Europe program is not the only European program where cultural activity is funded. So we often would send people to Erasmus Plus would be the main one. So the one we're talking about would be managed nationally by Largus. And this is related to all the youth programs, but then also all the non-formal or lifelong learning projects. And they have now said that there'll be 110 million. Now, again, that's across all of the 41 countries in the program, or 40 countries. And this is to support skills development, digital competencies, social inclusion through the arts, linking training, education in youth with the cultural and creative sectors. So it is something like those type of projects happen within Creative Europe, but this is just formalizing it within a strand of Erasmus Plus. So that's another really interesting one to keep our eyes on. Again, we're looking towards the next program, and I'm really conscious of time, but I feel like the one thing I say to people that's so important is to kind of recognize that Creative Europe, it's essentially a political and social program. So it is, as Aoife was saying, it's there to achieve clear political and social aims. So we saw with the last program, if I was to have a kind of tagline, I think the Commission was thinking, culture can help save the economy. And then we kind of are moving through this program, and we saw certain things kind of happen. I mean, one of the main things was the refugee and migrant crisis. And we see the European Commission responding through the addition of new objectives, specifically related to intercultural dialogue, and the social integration of refugees and migrants. So we see that kind of continuing. And I would say the new program will be much more about essentially culture can, keep us together. So these are really kind of the social inclusion, or probably more importantly, social cohesion ideas. So what will be the new program will be structured very similar to the last one. A lot of the objectives, I'd say, will be broadly the same, but you will have the addition of what they're calling cross-cutting objectives. So you've seen a lot of these type of projects that address gender equality, projects that really work with any kind of socially or economically marginalized group, but now they're really enshrining it. So this is one thing that I would say is very good for Ireland, because through the Arts Council, through lots of projects, not just with the Arts Council, I think Ireland's very strong on kind of collaborative based or community based arts projects or arts and health projects, and so I think this is a very positive for Ireland. The other thing that's hopefully going to happen, I think we kind of saw it with when we talked to Chris and Maoliosa and Joyce, the need to raise co-funding to get these projects off the ground. And that is often a big barrier for people here. And so one thing the European Commission has said is they're looking at reducing the amount of co-funding needed for the smaller scale projects. So that's a really good thing to look out for. Unfortunately, where in the last program we might have had the budget for the 7 years agreed, we might have had more information on the content of the project. That's really been delayed through obvious reasons or for obvious reasons. So just kind of stay in touch, and as soon as we hear an announcement, but it will probably be towards the end of this year. So now it's just a few things to maybe get you to start thinking and asking, questions about should you apply or could you apply? The one thing I say to people always when I meet with them is, if you are going after this funding just for funding, if you're saying, I have, a shortfall, or I want to do X, Y, and Z, it's really, that is the hard way. Because, the reality is there's a lot of work that has to go on to get you to the point of even being able to make an application. So what I always say to people is you don't have to apply, but start including it in some of your long-term, organizational planning or strategy. So really start asking yourselves, looking at the objectives which we talked about, start researching European projects and say, does it fit with something, we want to do anyway? So, Chris mentioned with the Glucksman that, international activities are part of their ongoing work, and that's really I think the key, because if you're trying to do a huge national program, a very large national program, and then add a European project on top of that, you will break your hearts. It will be so much work. Whereas if you're looking at kind of saying, this is some of the work we want to do, we want to look at kind of international projects. We want to develop partnerships. We want to do this type of work in the community, or, we want to build new audiences. We want to create an innovative model for work. This could be a great fit, and it's something to consider. But really, it needs to be something you kind of want to do anyway or develop anyway. And it could be, 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line, but the program will be there, and that is the great thing. The other thing is looking at your own organizational capacity, because as Maoliosa said, you will need to assign someone or assign someone's time to this project. There is a level of financial management and oversight that's required. So look and kind of think, okay, maybe we're not going to lead out or develop a project as a lead. Maybe we're going to come in as a partner, and that could be something, to look at that might address that. The other thing is, start talking to the Arts Council or your national funders and start working these plans into your ongoing conversations with them and your ongoing planning with them. So I'm just conscious of the time. We're okay. So this is kind of I guess some of the starting points. I mean, the first thing, I would say is just start researching. Start researching successful projects, start looking at some of the projects and some of the people involved. It could be something like you saw with the Vibe project, and what can often happen is if you see a project that you might be interested in that's ongoing, get in touch with them, maybe kind of attend. I mean, most of these projects would have a large symposium, at the end, or certain events. And then you might kind of be in a position to join when that project kind of develops and might apply again. The other thing is, if you can, and if your budget and your time allows for it, join a European network, because that will open you up to a huge number of your peer group across Europe. And, if you can attend their, annual general meeting and network there, look at yourself, and what you can bring, because I think sometimes here, from my experience of working with our Irish organizations, there isn't a recognition of the excellence that's actually happening here. I think if you looked at, the projects, we see and that make applications, where they fall down is almost never on, artistic quality or relevance to the project. It's often on, kind of their communication strategy or, different things. So recognizing and developing, that which will interest other European partners. And then, in terms of finding partners, the Creative Europe desk does assist with that. We have a network of desks all across the program, and we facilitate partner searches. But really the best thing is always to kind of look at existing relationships and try to build those, because these projects will test you. It will test that partnership, and you want it to be with people that you know and trust, I think, ideally. Looking at the ways in which your project aligns with, national policy. So that's something the European Commission always likes to see. I'm sure many of you have seen over the years, the last few years, the Arts Council's 10-year strategy, Making Great Art Work. There's a huge amount of alignment with European policy. So, start researching that and ways in which you can build that into your project. And then again, look at, I think with all of these things, it's really good to kind of start, if you're developing a partnership and you're starting to talk to people, actually start talking about the budget as soon as you can, and looking realistically at the budget and the scale of the project that you can all achieve. And then I think the last thing is, to attend. The way the cycle of our year works is we'll often start, kind of with a more general presentation such as this. And then as we move closer to the deadline, we start to have more targeted events. So every year, if you are planning an application, we bring you in and we'll kind of do a half day or a full day looking at your application and developing it. The other thing I just wanted to say, because we're starting to do these virtual events, is that if anyone had, first of all, any ideas of what they'd like to hear about, or if there's someone they'd like to hear from, obviously you can email us, but pop it in the chat as well now, because that does kind of get saved, for us. The other thing is, if you felt that your organization or your board or whoever would benefit from, Aoife or myself presenting or answering questions or chatting, we're always open to that. So do get in touch. I think that might be my end. We have some tips for individual artists. So this probably applies to anyone. If you are an individual artist listening to this, I would start researching first of all, obviously we have a list, and we have it on our website, of all the projects active now with Irish partners. So that's one way, because all of these projects do act as almost mini funding hubs, like you saw that with UCED. They have, and most of them will have open calls for at least some of the activities for all of, kind of Europe. So you can apply for those and start kind of looking at projects and kind of bookmarking them and following them, and you'll see stuff that comes up. The other thing is, like I was saying before, start to develop relationships you have with organizations, because sometimes, some of the, or a lot of the innovative ideas, or even some of the contacts, I've seen this before, where artists might have more, international contacts even than the administrators or directors of organizations. So you recognizing your own, kind of value, I guess, in terms of your contacts and your kind of European awareness. So, start linking in with organizations and your local arts offices. And then also look at some of the other EU funding programs, because some of them, such as the Europe for Citizens program or Erasmus Plus, can be seen as more of an entry-level award. And it might be a way to kind of test ideas and partnerships in a smaller way before you kind of come up to do a cooperation project. So Aoife's come on, so that must mean I'm finished now. Yes. So I'm just seeing, does anyone have any questions, or have I just talked too much?
I think you answered a lot of the questions there, but someone did ask, is there some kind of funding or seeding to start researching?
Not really, I guess. I mean, what I would say again is the Arts Council itself, it does support and recognize the value of international practice to artists. So if you're applying for any, again, it's not really offered now, but in past, I would say if you're applying for a travel and training or a bursary or a project award, it's not that that's mutually exclusive to developing ideas or relationships for a Creative Europe award. So they're not siloed in a way. So you as an Irish artist wanting to develop your international practice, then I would say, that's your project here. So not seeing them as separate, because the reality is there is no developmental award or preparation grant for Creative Europe projects. You will have to kind of do it in a more roundabout way. I know the Commission sees iPortunis as a way to do that. So when you see a mobility grant from the European Commission, such as iPortunis, you can actually use that with the idea that you might be doing a Creative Europe project.
Right, Cather. So someone else, is there a very specific tip for finding partners?
I guess the one thing we say is really people you kind of know and trust. In a really practical sense, I would say a lot of times it's if you are going, if you're going as a performer, if you're going to any kind of international festival, it's just really networking. Most people that I talk to, one of the most practical ways is joining a European network, an existing network of your sector. I would say that's
sorry, I was going to say as well that on our website, and also on the kind of more the EACEA, which we can give a link to that website, just it's interesting to go through the results for cooperation projects and look at the different projects and kind of look them up as a research tool, because there was a lot of projects, even just in my own kind of looking around, you find out about projects based in Croatia or projects with leads in Greece, could have just interesting subject matter that you're interested in, and you go through their websites and see what they've done. And I mean, maybe you might not be able to go and visit to see one of their events, but you could get in touch with them if there was something of interest. And also from our point of view, we're doing events in the coming months with different project leads or partners from all around Europe. So, to keep in touch with us and to kind of follow our events, you can hear about their projects and how they approached it.
Okay, very good. I think one last one. When will people get these presentations? from today?
Yeah, well, I would say this afternoon. I'll send them directly after. So I think I also probably promised a few links, but if anyone had any other, just pop it in the chat now.
Okay, I think that's it for questions.
Yeah, okay.
I think you see both of our contact details there. So just this obviously isn't the only platform, for us to answer questions or have a chat. So get in touch.
Yeah, and just to say thanks to our presenters, thanks a million to Maoliosa and to Joyce and to Chris. It was really brilliant, and we see from all the comments everyone really enjoyed listening to you and your stories about your projects, etc. I think we might have lost our presenters. But yeah, thanks a million for the contribution. Oh, there we go.
Yes, Maoliosa.
Yeah. We were just testing you.
Yeah.
Did you say?
Yeah, thanks a million.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to go over all the chat now after this anyway, and if we've missed a question, we can pop it in the follow-up email anyway. So thanks to everyone. I guess I'm going to close this down if everyone's happy with that.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. See everyone soon. Okay. Bye.
Cheers.
Great. Bye. Thank you.